I'm excited to dive in today. The presentation this morning is going to really focus on videography. So we talked so much about audio yesterday, went down the rabbit holes of broadcast audio, and now we'll talk about capturing quality video, because that's the other major half of the whole broadcast experience. And especially in this first hour, I really want to even just focus on capturing quality video at the source. We talked yesterday about capturing quality audio at the source. Well, the same concept applies for the video aspect of live streaming, because we can get the fanciest video switching system and switching software, and we can use great software like Resi out there to publish our stream to our audience. But if the video is captured in a poor way, if it looks horrible at the source, then it doesn't matter how much you spend on everything after the camera and how you use the camera. It doesn't matter how much you invest into the rest of the system, it's gonna look horrible. So the same concepts of we capture high quality audio at the source, we want to apply that to video as well. So we're gonna be talking about camera stuff, exposure, framing, resolution, frame rates. I'll talk about all these things, and I'll probably go pretty quick through the presentation. I want to leave more time. That's one thing I learned about yesterday, is I like it when you guys can ask more questions to kind of inform our content here. So somebody so responsible, Adam, actually turns off the switchers when he's done with it, so I had to turn it back on. There we go. So just to make sure, I know we're all at different levels with our knowledge about filmmaking and video stuff, so I just want to break some things down simply for us so we're all up to speed. If I say a word that you're like, hey, what does that mean? Just even, you can like raise your hand and let me know, but and I can explain it for you. So simple stuff with the anatomy of a camera, right? So here's a camera. One of my favorite types of cameras is C200. We use it for filming our courses in our studio. Could be great for your streaming setup as well. But don't worry about camera models yet, really at all, for most of this presentation. This part of the camera body. This part is the lens. So those are like the two main aspects of the camera. All the light comes into the lens. It hits the sensor on the body. It gets processed, and that's what we end up seeing as the image. So there's the sensor, and this is very important piece of the camera. And like when you're buying a camera, I want you to care more about, well, at least when it comes to the camera body, because you can buy different bodies, different lenses. When it comes to the camera body, I want you to focus on this thing, especially for a broadcast environment, more than anything else that these cameras do, because there's a lot of manufacturers out there who like to put a lot of bells and whistles on other aspects of the camera body, and they'll put all these specs and stuff on the box or whatever, but they put a junk camera sensor in here, and that's what's gonna make the video actually look good or not. So this is what's more important for the camera body performance. And just to kind of think about some terms or quick recommendations, we hear resolution a lot with cameras. And let me know if this mic is doing any weird stuff. It's, like I said, these wireless mics, we're having some issues, but I can switch it to another one or do a handheld if I need to. But resolution, most common for live streaming is 1080 or 720. So these are amount of pixels, really. It's referring to the vertical height of pixels, right? So 1080p, that's high definition, or HD. Video, and this is kind of what we're most used to watching in a lot of environments, and that's about as high resolution as you need to get for your live stream. If you really want to get into 4K world, you can. I still think we're a couple years out from this being much of a standard for live streaming environment. For capturing and pre-recording and posting, I think you could do 4K because most of the cameras have 4K capability. But even with our system, we have 4K cameras, we have a 4K switcher, but we're doing everything in 1080p. And one of the big reasons is that just current internet connectivity and bandwidth issues, it's just, you're not gonna demand such high internet speed to be able to do that. Aspect ratio, just another common term. Usually what we're shooting in HD is 16:9, so that's just the ratio of the size of the frame. And then you'll see these terms, progressive versus interlaced. After the resolution, you might see 1080p or 1080i. In our broadcast environment, stay with P. You want to have 1080p if your camera gives you the option. 1080i is interlace is kind of a more pre-digital, old school format. Basically how the video frames, each little frame is transmitted. So frame rates, this is a very important one to consider. This is when it's really determining how many images the camera is capturing per second. And that has a huge effect on what we call motion blur. And just the feel of when I'm walking around on this camera here that we're filming this event with, how natural it looks or unnatural it might look, how blurry it looks or how not blurry it might look. So my quick recommendations here would be either 30 frames per second or 24 frames per second. And you can get different style of looks there. I think if you want a more cinematic, smooth look, go with 24 frames per second. That increased motion blur with a lower frame rate will give you that smoother, more cinematic look. It's great for worship when you're filming the band. But then maybe for your pastors or communicators, 30 frames per second is better because there's less motion blur, might be more pleasing for the viewer. So we're in a unique environment for churches when it comes to frame rates, because we're shooting two types of piece of content in one service. There are ways to be able to have cameras that can go back and forth between frame rates mid-service. Most of the time though, you'll have to just pick one that you prefer and deal with the pros and cons of that. So in our stream at South Fellowship, you can look at it online. We are 24 frames per second in 1080p. So you can see that on YouTube or wherever we stream. And if it says 2398, 24 frames per second, pretty much the same thing. Don't worry about the discrepancy there. And then what makes a great camera? So I want to talk more about the sensor and what I mentioned earlier about when you're shopping for a new camera body. They're just important things to consider. So dynamic range. This is how well the camera maintains the quality of the bright and dark areas of the image. So go ahead and maybe, I'm trying to think, Chipper, you could probably put on the screens one of these camera angles. Let's do the main cam for me on the screens. So what's nice about these cameras, wow, that's a nice trippy mirror effect we got going on there. So what's nice about cameras like the Blackmagic Pocket 6K that I'm using is it does have has a larger sensor. That's a 35 millimeter sensor, Super 35. So it's pretty good in low light, but has that dynamic range where if you were looking at this same shot on a cheaper camera, chances are things like the brighter part of this image, like my hair right now, eventually it'll probably be a bald head or whatever, would be completely blown out. Like when I say blown out, I mean it's just completely white, unnaturally so. Like in person, you would see actual skin tone or whatever, or the natural color of my hair. But on the camera feed, you would see it would be super contrasty where it's my hair would be almost white or top of my head would be white. And then for the darker spots, on a cheaper camera, you notice how you can actually see decently some detail of the wooden panels behind me on the stage. Whereas if it was a really cheap camera with bad dynamic range, it would be pretty much just black behind me. So that's one of the quick ways to know what's the quality of the camera they're using is can it retain the information and detail in the bright parts of the image and the dark parts of the image? And that's why I mean dynamics Just when you think about dynamics in audio and you have like a compressor that decreases the dynamic range of audio, which is a good thing that you want in the audio world a lot of the time. In the video world, you don't want to decrease the dynamic range. You actually want to have as much information as possible in the brights and the shadows. So that's kind of a characteristic of a good quality camera's dynamic range. And you'll often see it referred to as stops, like does it have 10 stops, 12 stops, 13 stops, 16 stops. So our C300, which is a professional cinema camera, has like 16 stops of dynamic range. I think the Blackmagic cameras here have like 12 or 13 or maybe, something like that. So that's dynamic range. That's important. And then color science. How close to real life are the colors? Oh, sorry. So this is an issue I see a lot in many live streams, and I can kind of tell, like I had some of you guys submit your streams ahead of time, and this is kind of a common thing where it's kind of the most obvious tell for the lower end cameras out there, especially cheaper camcorders, Ptz cameras, is the colors just look all weird. Unfortunately, you can still get a decent image with those cameras if you can just dial in the settings right and work with white balance and tint and stuff like that. You can color it at the source. But if you have a better camera, like a Blackmagic camera, Canon, or something like that, it's gonna have better color science where the skin tones look more natural. They won't look all purpley or unnatural. And that's kind of you can tell the top image is like a red camera. They look normal. The bottom image is like a iPhone camera. They have this really magenta skew to it. So color science is really important. And then you got depth of field. This more has to do with, it's a combination of the sensor you have and the lens that you're using. Lens is a pretty big one, but also having a bigger sensor is gonna give you more depth of field even with whatever lens that you're using. So the depth of field is kind of that pleasing blurry background look that you have. If you do like portrait mode on your phone, it can kind of simulate that. But even in your broadcast stream environment, it's cool when you have shots that show that depth. It really helps your subject stand out in your shot. And then low light capability. That's the other important thing to do, to invest in a higher end camera. And a lot of this, like if you have a cheaper camera, smaller sensor, it's physically capturing less light. So the camera has to compensate in kind of, you have to turn up the ISO or the gain, just like with audio, in the audio world, if a signal's not loud enough, you have to turn the gain up. But then the more you turn it up, you could actually risk distorting the sound. Kind of the same thing with video. The more you turn gain up, it's gonna actually distort the image. And that's why you have really noisy images. So these are all reasons just why to invest more into a better camera. And I was talking to Bill before this, and he gave me a great tip, guys, that you can use when you're talking to your leaders. Remember Bill's a Chick-fil-A operator, so that's why he thought about this analogy to use. But he says whenever he's presenting like a new investment or system to his leadership or his pastors, he just says, well, pastor, do you want a Chick-fil-A experience or do you want an Arby's experience? Whenever they're thinking about particular gears or systems or whatever they want to improve or implement. And I think it's perfect. It's like everybody can resonate with that, right? Of like, oh gosh, Chick-fil-A, here's all the money in the world. I want the Chick-fil-A experience. So this could apply to audio, video. I'm gonna use that analogy a lot, and in a lot of things. But with cameras, it's kind of what it comes down to. Do you want, like, when you're comparing, is it worth getting a camera like a Blackmagic cinema camera versus a similarly priced or probably cheaper camcorder? Do you want a Chick-fil-A experience or do you want an Arby's experience? That's, at least from a video guy's perspective. So that's just kind of the anatomy of camera, important things to think about. Any questions about anything thus far? Because I want to go into some lighting concepts. Oh, sorry, red is, that's, in this YouTube video, this was they were demoing a red camera. It's like a model of it's a brand of a camera versus an iPhone. Yep. I'll move on to lighting. We'll have plenty of time for more camera questions, but here's my super technical 3-point lighting diagram. So I guess this would be, if I was a worship leader, like this would be, well, it's kind of confusing looking at it, but pretend this is you guys out there. I'm on stage as a worship leader. Lighting is another huge area to get high quality video at the source, right? And I think this could actually solve, again, looking at a lot of your streams, I think this could solve a lot of issues. In general, I don't think you need to buy a whole ton of new gear. You generally don't have to, especially in the video world. You could probably just improve your lighting setup and dial in your camera exposure better, and you'll be amazed at what even some of these lower end cameras can do. So with lighting, especially for our worship leaders and our pastors, you want to have good, sufficient front lighting, right? So I got actually like 4 what we call key lights, like key and fill lights. Usually you can just refer to these ones in the front as key lights. And then we've also got some backlights right here, kind of coming, or hair lights. So that's what you see here, backlight, front lights, and to just sufficiently light a subject, and you're not trying to be all fancy and stylized with it, like a communicator, like what I'm doing now. That's it. Like that's the magic formula right there. But it's amazing. Like I've seen a lot of churches, and it's like nobody thought about just basic 3-point lighting. And they say 3-point because usually, like if I'm in a studio, more of a studio environment, I'll have one of my front lights be my main key light that's a bit brighter, and then I'll have another front light that's not as bright. It's more of a fill light. So it's like most of my light comes from here. This fills in the other side of the face a little bit more, and then I have my hair light. And I'll demonstrate, so I have my lighting software control here, so I can kind of demonstrate the importance of it for you. So yeah, let's do that real quick first. So I'll turn off all the lights here. So here's just my hair light. And let's go ahead and throw the camera on the screens too for this. So that's my hair light at around 20% brightness, 40%, and then 60%. That's like way overkill. Probably, and I can actually just toggle it a little bit here. Probably actually somewhere in 30% is ideal. So why do you want a hair light? It's so that you could have some good separation between your subject and what's behind them. Even if you have good front lighting, but if you don't have any like nice backlighting or a hair light, it's just gonna be very flat, the image. It's just not gonna have that nice separation. And you'll see in a moment when I have all the lights on. All right, I'll give you guys some house lights so you can see what you're doing. Okay. So there's a hair light. The other thing I like to do with a hair light is have it be warmer. So you'll notice when I say warmer, I'm talking about color temperature. It's going to be, these are just the nice warm, cozy lights. And some of the temperature of these lights, we're kind of limited. We redid some of the aiming of these fixtures and some of the lighting design in here about a month or 2 ago. This is still one of the bigger projects I want to make some other changes to in the near future. So we're kind of working with what we got right now. And yeah, that's the backlight. So then here are the hair light. So then let's go ahead and turn on let's see, how well is this hair light distributed? So I kind of lose it over here. With these ones specifically, we were kind of fighting, like this was our only option to mount them right there. And if we put them like too high, they'll start like getting in your eyes and stuff. So we're kind of fighting with the angle, the best angle to work with. Because then if I come back here, I lose it completely. And if I come up, I start losing it. but if I angle them up, it'll be in your eyes. So, you just kind of work with what you got and what you can do. Maybe ideally, we could move them like this way more, so then we'd have even more of a little bit more of a vertical angle coming down. So we'll still keep tweaking with it. Okay, so here let's bring in a key light. So here is this is a moving light that is a pretty decent quality one. We can control the color of it pretty well. But here you go. Now you can see just me lit with one light here, and you can kind of see how it's responding. The camera's responding to it. This light is a bit cooler in the color temperature, and I would prefer we would actually have front lights that are even closer to daylight. I think that is what usually looks best for skin tones. So overall, our lighting in this room is just kind of a bit warmer than I'd prefer. And some of the upgrades I want to make, I want to get lights that are a bit cooler. I had to match this moving light. Even though it's LED, I can change the color. I wanted to match it to some of these other regular incandescent lights that we have up here. Oh, now I have like blind spots in my eyes and I can't see anything. There it is. Okay, so this is our we call this our front light full scene. So all 4 of our spots are on. But these lights, we can't control color temperature. They just kind of are what they are. They're a bit warmer than I prefer. But hopefully you can see, especially it's really more stark. Let's go ahead and I'll turn the hair light off. Okay, so no hair light. Sorry, I got a huge blind spot right in my eye too. So, okay, no hair light, and now hair light at 40%, or let's go back to 20%. So, hair light at 20, no hair light at 20. You kind of seeing the difference, how it just kind of helps separate me from what's behind me. It can look more pleasing for sure. And then what I like to do, so like usually when we have a preacher or communicator where, it looks like this, that's why the lighting scene we have set up today looks like this. When we're doing worship, we can be a little bit more dramatic, and that's when you can come in and have like one of these like single spots where this side of my face isn't as well lit as like this side. So it can kind of add a bit more of a dramatic feel to it. Then we can add some like color behind or something like that. And this is kind of a lighting look that we would use for a worship set. So that's the thing. When you're using front lighting and stuff, you want to have sufficient lighting. If it's a communicator, I would say have pretty even lighting. If you're doing music, you can kind of be more fancy with like, let's just light them with one key light from the side, have a little bit more shadow on the face, and that'll look pretty cool. Any questions about this lighting stuff? Or you can do disco party like this or something. Or here it is. No, these ones. Or no, watch these. There we go. There's like our house disco party right there. That's what we do, up and down. Then they can't complain. It's like, hey, they're down. Oh, now they're up. They're down. Y'all have to be happy. So I'd say during worship, I think we're somewhere around here. And then, yeah, I mean, we're here, like during music, it's like this. And then we'll throw in the color, Oops, it's the wrong lighting fixture. So we'll throw in color. So we have blue or purple or yellow or whatever. And it kind of helps support the dynamics of the song. It provides light for the audience. It's different in all churches. I know that the house lights being bright or dim is kind of a personal preference, but this is kind of what we do. Higher energy parts of songs, we'll do this. I like it because it adds energy to the room without it like shining a bunch of lights in their eyes. It's just kind of coming down on top of them. So, any other questions with lighting stuff? Yeah, but I'd love to change that. So those are just the lights they've had here for a while, but I'm pretty sure they're just halogen. I would like to get, like, there's just some nice LED, like Martin makes some really nice lighting fixtures. Chauvet makes nice lighting fixtures. I would like to get probably the same amount to replace those, and I'd like to have them cooler temperature, like closer to daylight temperature. And then that makes a really nice contrast between the cooler front lighting and the warmer back lighting. That'll make your backlight stand out even better. Yeah, the reason light key, so I'm just screen sharing right now, the computer back there that has light key, so I can just control everything DMX. So, what are the different types of fixtures and stuff? Yeah, I mean, in a church environment, you've got your spotlights, and then there's different kind of models. You can have Fresnel lights, which are these ones, I believe, up here. If there's any lighting experts in the room, correct me. Then there's ellipsoidal lights. I like those better because they have a bit more control. We're using some ellipsoidals for our hair lights back here. I kind of wish it was reversed. Again, I wasn't here when this was initially set up, but things will probably change soon. And then with our LED lights, we've just got a bunch of LED par cans, pretty much all back here above the stage. So there's a lot you can do with even just two fixture types. LED par cans that can change colors, and then your basic spotlights that are Fresnels or ellipsoidals. The huge thing, the last big point I want to make, and this is, again, I think I noticed this in some live streams of yours, is don't use colored lights on the front of your subjects. That's gonna really throw off the skin tones, and it's just not gonna look good. It might look cool if you're trying to have some sort of dramatic theater effect for something, but in our environment, when you're just trying to light a musician or a pastor, like, you don't wanna light them with a colored LED fixture. So we don't have any of those LED fixtures like this one. I just don't like using these at all up on our trusses to front light. There still are a few of them up here. Again, something I hope I can change in the near future. I'd rather have more ellipsoidal spotlights up here to get, like, here's our keys player, here's our guitars, our bassist, our drummer. You just don't know, you don't want to have fancy colors on people. It makes them look like Smurfs, or like they have, if they're sick, or they look like they're sick or something. It's just, and then on camera, it's only gonna exaggerate that and look even worse. Like, if you feel like your people look purple or blue or whatever, it's because you're lighting them with a purple or blue light. So don't do that. Yeah, which is why I love ellipsoidals for those front lights. We could hang them even farther back if we wanted to. But these are actually pretty good angles, I think, for even if we put some ellipsoidals there. But ellipsoidals are great because you can just really frame out. Like, I could say, instead of these Fresnels that are kind of washy, I could tell the ellipsoidal lights, like, don't go beyond this front of the stage here, or cut it off like the back, like a nice hard line back here. So that's kind of like what I had to do was for, like, this LED light here, and some of it depends on the quality of the fixtures you're working with, because you can go and change the color, right? So I had to spend, I don't know, like a half hour. Like, I would turn this light on, and I turned on the other washes, and they're still not perfectly matched, but, like, this is, with the light that I had, I went into the design panel on light key, and we can show you back there after a session, and you just have to tell it, like, okay, it's got to be kind of in this, it has some amber in it, has white in it, and it has amber, and it's like blending those two just the right way so that it does have this more natural kind of, just more natural look to it, like it's an incandescent or a halogen bulb. It's hard. What's really hard is when all you have to work with are, like, the cheaper colored lights like that, and it's just, there's only so much you can do. Like, it almost can be impossible to reproduce, like, a really high quality key light. But good. It's another, when you're thinking about lighting fixtures, do you want the Chick-fil-A experience or the Arby's experience? Like, especially with LED ones. So you'll know, again, all of our LED lights, even the cheaper ones, all behind me. We even have some color backlights up here too. They're probably a little bit brighter than I actually would prefer. Because you could have a nice key light and then I could backlight myself with a color instead of the warm halogen look. Anything else? Yeah. I mean, it just depends on the culture of your church and what people think is distracting. I don't know. We try not to have any fixtures that are like really shining into people's eyes ever. And we don't have any moving lights that would ever do that. But also we have a larger, our congregation definitely skews an older generation. So it's like, yeah, I just know as a worship leader, I'm not going to do that much fancy stuff. We're the look of what we do. Like I said earlier, was like, okay, house is there. Maybe we'll have some blue background and blue house lights or whatever like that. And then I'll have the worship leaders are up here, so we'll light us this way. And then we'll have these backlights on. Forgot to plug one of those ones back in. And like this, pretty sure. Oh, then we have our little string lights above me. It's kind of cool because these actually can function like a hair light. Provides that warmth from above. So this is a look that we'll build, and then I'll add energy in by. This is about as exciting as we get here at South Fellowship. We'll move around, we'll fade in and out the house lights over you, or the back lights. We can fade them around like that, change colors. I find this is an effect you can apply to a group of lights that adds a little bit of energy without being strobing or crazy. If people, fades are a bit more easier on the eyes, I think, for people. But it's fun because there's Totally, yep. Yeah, a lot slower, longer fades. Yeah, totally. So if I went here, you guys, Lightkey can do all sorts of fun stuff. You can just I don't think you're gonna make your congregation super happy doing a bunch of stuff like this. Yeah, during the message. Oh, here's a funny story. So again, just to remind you guys that I'm in this just like you, and I have congregants coming up after services to me, being like, "Are you the worship leader?" And I'm like, "Well, it depends. Do you have something nice to say, or?" But no, this was actually a fair critique. So I don't know how we missed this, but during a sermon, after a worship set, we had this yellow lighting scene going, and during the sermon, it just didn't get triggered to the actual look it was supposed to be on the sermon. And from the tech booth, you can't really see those moving lights up there. So it was like this, for a whole sermon, basically. So I was like, oops. But I think anything else anything else with lighting, particularly in relation to camera and your broadcast. Because the big point I'm trying to make here is your cameras need light, and they will accentuate good light or bad light. So just make sure you can't capture great video at the source without good lighting. So yeah. Yeah, so the big question was you guys can see the actual fixtures. We're trying to be careful to make sure the ones up there on top of the panels that are pointed down enough so they're not directly in your eye, but they're also pretty washy lights. And then these ones on the floor, you can see them, but we have to make sure they're pointed up and kind of still across the stage instead of out here towards the seats, because we've had people, sometimes those lights have got kicked and they move, and then it's blinding someone here in the congregation. So I think it's cool, especially That's actually one of the nice things about haze. If you can use haze, well, we're definitely not there yet here, but if we could use haze, we could, I feel like, hide the fixtures themselves a little bit more, and then you could see the beams of light, and that would add a lot to the look of it. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps at all, but like you gotta be careful. Just don't blind people, probably, would be my biggest tip. Light Key. Yep, it's a Mac-based lighting software. We like it. It's kind of our main go-to. All right, I want to make sure I have time to move on through a few more slides and some demos of the actual camera. So framing, very important. Here is Craig Rochelle, and I just stole from some frames from those guys because they know how to do video really well. And you can kind of even tell, like, you know, look, he's got their LED fixtures behind them, and he's backlit well. You could see the light kind of around his shoulders and his hair. He's front lit really well with some great front. His skin tones look really natural. His muscles look really huge. You know, I joke people. It's like, yeah, I have a trainer, and like this is my goal right here. Just be like Craig Rochelle. But framing, so lighting's awesome, obviously, right? And you can watch the tech tour they're set up to see like why, like all the things that go into it on our YouTube channel. But let's talk about the frame of it. This looks different than this, right? So that's called framing, how the camera is cropped in or not, and how it's kind of positioned on your subject. And this is an important concept for us is headroom, especially when you have a follow cam that's going to be close to your pastor or whoever. You just want to make sure that you have headroom. You have enough headroom, but you don't have too much headroom, because it would look awkward if his face was like down here in the middle of the frame and you had all this headroom. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. It would just feel very unnatural. So just whenever you're watching TV or professionally made videos, pay attention to like how they're framing and like what's the headroom look like? How does that affect how I feel? Because filmmakers, cinematographers can make you feel certain ways, like whether it's super close or like no headroom, or if it's far away. But for our environment, you've got like a medium close shot. That's what I would call this. And then you've got a full shot. So our camera, we've kind of got it set up so our main cam is like kind of always stuck on a full shot that captures the front of the stage here. Someday I hope to have a dedicated follow camera operator there to get more of these like medium close shots. Bethel, another close shot, even closer. They have a humongous lens on their main follow cam. Another important concept, the rule of thirds. So if you have your frame, you divided it into like 3 sections with these grids. You can see like they put Corey Asbury perfectly on this left third intersection and left and upper intersection here. And the rule of thirds is something to think about, like if you're not just like center framing a shot like you usually would a communicator, maybe you're trying to be more creative with like filming worship like they are here. It just adds more depth, right? So he's kind of like more forward in the image, and then this other worship leader is kind of in the background more, blurred out. They're using probably a Blackmagic 6K camera with maybe a 70 to 200 lens or something like that from the side, like if that camera operator was down there. But the rule of thirds, another important thing to think about. Don't use automatic exposure in a church live streaming environment, so don't just put it on auto. It's gonna do a lot of different things as lighting changes and stuff like that happen. Use manual mode to set your camera exposure during rehearsal or whenever you can beforehand. And exposure should really not have to change during the service, since your stage lighting, at least from a front lighting perspective, shouldn't be really changing at all throughout the service. So make sure you're working with your lighting designer and stuff to make sure like you guys agree on that. The exposure triangle. So I'll get behind the camera in a few moments to unpack this more, but aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, gain. these are like the three big ones of like when we're setting manual exposure on a camera, the things they have to get right. This is a helpful little diagram. I'll have a bigger picture of it later on that we'll look at. Think of aperture. It's kind of like the pupil of a camera. Your eye has a pupil. It like opens up. It lets more light in. If it gets smaller, it reduces the amount of light. It's measured in these fractions that we were talking about earlier. F over 2.8 is actually it's larger than F 5.6. Even though it's kind of confusing. It's all about it's a fraction, right? So having a like 1/2 is bigger than 1/4, same kind of deal here. So it's kind of backwards. Even though this number is bigger, it's a smaller fraction. Larger aperture lets in more light. It's gonna have a blurry background. A smaller aperture lets in less light and will have less blurry background. Things will be more in focus. So here's kind of that triangle I was looking at or showing you earlier. I think I just found this on Google Images. You can find it online if you want to. But it kind of just shows you like the relationship between aperture, shutter speed, ISO, how it affects the image. Like if I increase ISO or the sensor sensitivity, it's gonna make it brighter, but it's also gonna create more noise. And then if we're thinking about shutter speed, that's like basically how quickly the shutter is opening and closing to let in light, also measured in fractions. You can reduce the shutter speed, but it's gonna give you more motion blur and let in more light. Exposure will obviously affect light. It'll make things brighter or darker, but with all these different settings, it's also gonna affect like the characteristic of the image. So you gotta keep that in mind. It's like a balancing act, like going for what you wanna go for here. So, yeah, shutter speed. The amount of time measured in seconds the camera spends capturing an individual image affects the amount of light and motion blur. And usually with shutter speed, like in all our cameras here, when you're doing a video environment, because you can do it differently in photo, but we're in a video environment, shutter should be set to double the frame rate to mimic more natural motion blur. So if the frame rate is 24 frames a second, set shutter to 1/48 or 1/50 if it doesn't let you select 1/48. So shutter speed. ISO, just be careful with it. Like it's different on every camera, but with like our Blackmagic cameras, I don't like to go much higher than 1250 ISO, 1600. It starts to get really grainy. There's our triangle again. ND filters, these are kind of cool. It's like sunglasses for cameras. It's handy when you want to maintain your frame rate, shutter speed at 1/48 or 1/50, and you want to really open up your aperture to have a nice depth of field, but it's too bright, and you don't want to increase your shutter speed, so you can pop on an ND filter, and that'll reduce the amount of light coming in. So that's another way to affect exposure without having to adjust aperture, ISO, or frame rate, shutter speed, sorry. Some of the recommended cameras we have, and we can talk more about these. Sony, so this is kind of like if you're just getting started, more beginner live stream setup, but it's gonna look great, Sony A6400 or one of the comparable models in that line of cameras. It's got the APS-C sensor, lets in a ton of light, so it's gonna have less noise, higher image quality, more depth to the image, and you can put all sorts of great lenses on it. The Blackmagic Pocket 6K camera, that's what we have. We actually have Pocket 4K cameras here, so I'd say 4K or 6K are great cameras. We have a 6K up here on the drums, and then 4K in the rest of the room. We're actually waiting on another 4K to come here for our drum cam. That 6K belongs in my studio. I just want to talk about Ptz cameras. You guys probably have heard me talk about it before. It's cool. You can remote control. You can pan, tilt, zoom. I think in most cases, I would rather just have like more fixed camera angles than pan, tilting, and zooming. Just as a filmmaker, it just doesn't excite me or make me that happy to be able to pan, tilt, and zoom things. I know certain church environments it could make more sense, but in this one, we have 4 fixed camera angles. Well, that one is on a slider back there, so it gives us a little bit of motion. But we have 4 angles that are pretty much fixed, and we can cut between those. It adds visual variety to the service, and it works pretty well. Ptz cameras, my biggest thing I don't like about them is the sensor size, because they're putting sensors in there that are about the same size as the sensor in your cell phone, and then that's why the image just looks like trash. It's like the same sensor that your cell phone has without the magic computing power of an iPhone, and then it looks horrible. So that's why I just like, it's so much harder to really produce a great image with these things. So, oh, that actually reminds me, so Matt, the Canon rep, will be here later today, and he will be demoing, he'll have out there a new Canon Ptz camera that has a 1-inch sensor in it, which is pretty cool. 1 inch is still not that huge of a sensor, but it's probably comparable to Micro Four Thirds or something like that. So I would definitely check that out when he has that here. So I was gonna spend some time, I already did like the lighting demo stuff, so I just wanna kinda get behind the camera and show you guys. Oh, that's good. That's good to know. So get the 6400 or above, and we just use dummy power supplies. And like I said, that camera specifically is in the studio and the course setup over there, plugged into an A10 Mini if you wanna check it out. Yeah. Yeah. How about do this, Adam, where's Adam at? Adam, go on the Pro Presenter computer, pull up our stream from last week here so they can see the different angles, and then you'll be able to on that A10 Mini Pro back there, input 3 is that computer, so you can just screen share the YouTube stuff. So Adam will get that up so you can see what I'm talking about. But what I like to have, let's say if you're working with at least 2 cameras, in that case, I would have something that would be give you a nice like full shot or even a close medium shot, kind of like a follow cam, which in our case is that camera straight in the back of the room, and then have a nice wide shot, which is the second camera in the tech booth that's like wider, gets the congregation, pretty much the whole stage, right? If I had 2 cameras, that's what I would do. And then with a third camera, what we've done here in this setup would be, we have like, usually it's on a tripod over by that wall over there, and then it has a, I think I put the 24 to 105 on it, and it gets that shot right there. So that's a side, it's gonna be on you pause it on the Kaylee's angle right there. So that is right, we have a SDI drop right here, and our pianist is usually, well, you can kind of tell, like on the other side of the stage of the drums. And this is kind of a great shot if like someone's leading from piano, we can have it tighter on them, or we can have a little bit wider on the whole band. But it's kind of cool because it gets our backline musicians. So that's our like third camera, and then with a fourth camera, then I would put it at least on the drum cam. If I didn't have this fourth camera, I think maybe I'd keep that other side camera, trying to get drums in it too. But now we have a dedicated camera for the drummer, and that's what he'll show you here in a second. Yeah, this camera right here. It's a pretty wide angle, 16 millimeter on a Super 35 Blackmagic 6K. And yeah, that's it. I mean, so that's kind of my thought process through it. If our next improvements I want to make, kind of like I mentioned earlier, so stop right there, is I would like for this camera to be on a platform back there with a proper tripod for an operator, and it can be that close medium shot on worship leader or pastor, and it'll just follow whoever's leading. That's what I'd like to, that's my next upgrade I would like to do, to kind of take our current stream to the next level. So yeah, and even like for us in room, like we're not even having to worry about any iMag stuff. Like we don't put, we're not putting any of our video feeds onto these screens. But in room, you're more talking about just like not distracting the congregants who are in here with like cameras everywhere and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, man, I just think it's kind of like a church culture thing, and kind of what are people used to and okay with, like, because you can go to like a church like Red Rocks, and yeah, they've got like a 30-foot dolly guy like running back and forth. He's like, the whole time. He's just like literally just does this the whole time. And if you're like, but you can be behind them, there's a bunch of seating back there, and people are okay with that. They're just used to it. And I think people kind of just get used to things, and they're okay with it. Like, I actually think we could have a remote handheld operator who just kind of floats around up here, and most of the church would have no clue that was happening. It would be weirder if we had some guy who was like doing the handheld operator here, like, running around the stage, like that. That to me, it's like, unless if you have a really big stage, like I don't know, it's kind of overkill. But yeah, we don't. I mean, maybe this room is almost big enough where in the back it'd be nice if we had eye magnification to make it, so you can see the person better or whatever. But yeah, we don't do it. Plus, I think there's like some latency issues. Chipper, put my main camera on the screen again. So I don't know if I was talking, so you can, and part of that, I think latency is worse when you're in 24 frames a second. Can't explain the science behind that. John Clark was explaining to me one time. It's like when you're doing in iMac, 60 frames a second is actually better to be having your system in it. But yeah, for us, it's not really different because I think I'm smaller there to you than I am here with the framing of this shot. So we're not even having a close shot to really have that iMac. You can put it back to the other one now, Chipper. Actually, no, sorry. You can keep it on the cameras because I want to move over here real quick and do some demos with this camera. And then I need someone who's just going to stand on stage and be my subject. You'll get a ticket. Yeah, Doug, go ahead. There we go. You'll get more tickets. So this camera here, let me go to a setting that should show you the on-screen stuff here. Workshop, load that. No? There we go. All right, looks like the ISO and stuff was different. All right, so you can kind of see all the things that we're playing around with here. Let me just zoom in. Okay, this is 105, cool. So this actually setup has a speed booster on it, so it's kind of actually changing the settings of the lenses a little bit, but not a huge issue. So here's the different settings. So let me actually shutter. We have it set right now where it's showing angle, which is good. It's at 180. But let me show you shutter speed instead. Okay, 1/48. So things to think about with exposure. So obviously right now we would call, what do you call this? Underexposed, because it's like way too dark. And then if you went like this, that's the ISO at 25,000, overexposed, way too bright. All right, so okay, so in general, like on these cameras, I'm like, let's say I want to start at keep my ISO at 1250, and let me see if I'll adjust some other settings. So here's my iris or my aperture. It's at f2.6, but if I crank this number up, he's gonna get darker, right? F11. If I were outside on a sunny day shooting a landscape, this would be great because it'll reduce the light coming in and everything will be in focus, but we don't want that. So f2.6, honestly, it's still kind of lower than what I kind of would just want f.4 on this, because when you're shooting from an angle like this, I just wanna make sure everything's in focus there on the front of that platform as he moves back and forward or whatever. And then what's next here? Shutter speed. So again, with a lot of our video cameras, like I'm never really touching the shutter speed. I'm keeping it at 1/48 of second. If I were to go to 1/24, it's going to have more motion blur. Good demonstration of that. I wonder if you're going to see, yeah, if I went 1/96, keep doing that. Yeah, you guys can see that difference. Okay, notice his hand, at least I think it, maybe psychologically it's just happening, but I feel like his hand is blurry right now, like the motion blur, right? That's 1/24. If I go to 1/96, less blur, right? And it looks horrible. So 1/48 is like a nice natural amount of motion blur. Because it's twice the frame rate of the video frame rate. Okay, you can rest your arm now. That's where, like, you remember when The Hobbit came out, and it was in, I think they had it in, so was it 60 or something like that? I think it was 48. Like the final publishing frame rate, I think, was 48, where we're used to 24. And it just looked weird. It like made you feel sick when you're watching the movie. You get used to it, but like I said, we all get used to everything sometimes. But yep. So yeah, if you're doing 30 frames a second, then shutter speed should be 1/60. Sometimes you can, like, if you are dealing with light issues, like if it's like, I actually need to reduce light with shutter speed, but 1/60 is too bright, then you could double that again to 1/120. And still, it's all about the angle. And that's why this camera, you'll notice shutter can be in a fraction like that of shutter speed, or I can change it to shutter angle, which is 180 degrees, which is probably another old school thing with film, and we're using this old terminology. Okay, white balance. I didn't want to cover that. So right now it's at 4000K. That's the top right of the screen next to ISO. Actually, sorry, no. Before I go to that, ISO, I want to make it clear to you guys that, you know, certain cameras have like sweet spots of ISO of like where you just don't want to go over, because then there's so much noise in that image. Yeah, so for me, it's like 1250 works great on these cameras. It's actually interesting. One thing I notice here is actually something's affecting color when I go from 1000 to 1250. Does anyone know why that quirk is there? I don't know if you can see it. It's like not just the brightness, but, or maybe, I don't know. It looks like it's like actually affecting the color of it, but who knows. All right, and then white balance. So the way we did it is, this actually should be a little bit lower there. So the way I set white balance, so you have the different color temperatures, right? And you can stay there, Doug. I think I have a slide for it. Chipper, do I have a slide in ProPresenter that talks about like color temperature and white balance? Yep, totally. So he said find what the camera's native ISO is, what it's like kind of designed to be at, which is usually like 400, 600, somewhere in there maybe, and then you work your other settings around that. Did I have a slide? Maybe, I could have sworn I did. So, I'll just show you guys. So, on the camera, the color temperature numbers, it's kind of sometimes a little mind-bending because you have to think about what are the color temperatures of my lights. Like, because really color temperature, you're telling the camera, like, what is true white, basically. Like, that's when you're dialing in the temperature. So then it's gonna render the image in a warm or cool enough way that'll make the skin tones look natural. So the way I think about it is like when I'm in my studio, we have daylight key lights that are like on the back of the lighting fixture. I can set the temperature of them, and they're at 5600 Kelvin. So yeah, you instead of seeing 3500 like you do there, it'd say 5600. And they're like true daylight fixtures. And so when I go to my cameras, I also put in the setting 5600 Kelvin, and then it looks on camera the same way that it looks in real life. So that's how I set it. So that's what I did here is I don't know on these fixtures, like at least I'm not aware, they don't tell me what exactly the temperature is of them, but I came to my camera and I was like, what white balance temperature is gonna give me the most natural skin tones that I like? And potentially in our case, I wanted to cool it down a little bit more. Because remember how I said earlier, I wasn't a huge fan of how warm some of those front lights are. So I'm pretty happy with where this was at. Actually, I think this was at 4,000 a second ago. So notice when I increase this number, it gets very, very warm, right? So it's at 10,000 Kelvin. And this is me telling the camera like how to calibrate, like and approximate, like what to base the color white from, basically, like temperature wise. And he would, if I had like a super ultra daylight light fixture on him right now, maybe he would look more natural. But right now, because I have a warmer light fixture on him, he looks way too warm. And then I can go the opposite direction, down to 2,500 Kelvin, now he looks really cool. So in this environment, we're like, okay, I think these lighting fixtures on the stage are around just under 4,000 Kelvin. So when I go there, tell my camera that, it starts to look more natural to like what we're seeing in person, right? So that's the thing, is you gotta know like what temperature are your lighting fixtures at? Get that accurate measurement or number, and then put that into your camera. Yeah, I think there's some tools out there. People like the auto calibration, stuff like that, and using the cards. I like to use what looks good to me on screen. And that's how I do it. And this is the kind of most scientific way to do it to me, is just knowing like, instead of worrying about cards and stuff like that, is just, first of all, it's gonna help you if you have all the same model cameras across your sanctuary, right? That's the most ideal. And then, because they all gonna treat white balance the same, and then just go and just do what I just showed you here. That's what I would do. Yeah, and it's like not super scientific. If anybody else in the room has like super great ways of setting white balance they want to recommend? Yeah. So he said you can get a gray card. These cameras have settings. I think actually Aaron, our worship pastor, might have done that at one point, and I think he wound up with like 4,000 Kelvin being where he wanted to be. But to me, I'm like, I just feel like I like to cool it off a little bit more, being down at like maybe 3,600, 3,500. And I was just happy with the way that looked. Yeah, so that's, yeah. Yeah, there's also a LUT on here. So, that also affects the coloring of it too. So if I show you guys taking the LUT off, LUT on, right? So it adds like the contrast and saturation. So this is just like a camera. What LUTs are is like a kind of a quick color grading settings that you can load into these cameras, especially with the Blackmagics, and they make it a pretty easy process. Same with Canon, but with the Canon cameras, I just like their built-in LUTs that they have. But yeah, we can actually dial in these LUTs however we want. But yeah, let's see, if I take that off. I mean, it's adding contrast and saturation. I'm not sure how much it's like affecting if it's really affecting temperature that much. We made a custom one. I'll show you like some of the basic Blackmagic ones because we weren't huge fans of them. So that's one of them. The highlights look horrible. That's the film to extended video. This is film to video. This is a built-in. So this is a good example. Like if you're gonna buy this camera, get it out of the box, like this still looks pretty good. Pocket 4K film to video LUT, like it's not that bad. But then here's the one that this Aaron made, this one. See, that makes it, but his makes it a lot warmer. So I'm like, maybe that's the reason why. I was like, it's all subjective preference, because whenever Aaron made his LUT, he obviously wanted to stylize it like that. But now that I'm doing this, it's fun to do this in front of all you guys. I'm like, you know what? Well, I kind of like that more. I don't know, like, right? Yeah, like, yeah. So there you go. Adam, I think I'm gonna switch all these LUTs back to the standard one. Because the other one is just like, but again, Aaron likes the warm vibe to it, and it's a subjective thing that you can have about the way you want your videos to look. So, yeah, well, I have to, since we're on the other one, I gotta switch it back for all the other cameras here. Yeah. I think one thing I do like about what he did is on this was, even though it's skewing warmer, I like what he did with the highlights and shadows a little bit better than the built-in LUT. So, yeah, guys, I've been going for a long time. I think it's time for a break. I pretty much covered everything I wanted to about cameras and lighting. But yeah, let's go ahead and let's break, and then I'll have questions later.